If everything's ready here on the dark side of the moon, play the pipe tones.
There were a lot of different looking beings. There were humanoids. We had some that ranged from 5 foot tall, 5.5 foot tall. This one right here that was depicted by an artist for us that I saw on the ship. They sat there and had kind of a smirk on their face the whole time, and were mainly just watching. I did not see them actually get up and speak at all. They mainly seemed to be just observing. And that seemed to be the case for several of the beings there. They didn't necessarily have a full stake in the genetic programs. They seemed to be there as observers. And this being seemed to be one of those. I found it very interesting that some of these non-terrestrials looked just like us. Some of them had slightly different shades of skin, but some of them looked exactly like us. They could walk down our streets and maybe just look like a little bit of an odd human. One of those groups was the Nordics, who I'd become familiar with earlier in life. My first encounter was with a Nordic. The Nordics were very much involved. They seemed to be have some sort of a clerical type of position in this council, and they had a lot of representatives at the meetings, and they seemed to be walking around and having discussions with little breakout groups of these non-terrestrials. So they definitely have a pretty high involvement in all of these different programs that are going on. And a lot of people, they use the generic term Nordic when there are a number of different species that you could call Nordics, that some of them are very tall, 8-9 feet tall. They have blonde hair. They seem to always have a chili bowl type cut, bobbed hair. And they have 6 fingers. They're very muscular. And they have blue eyes, and there are others that are not necessarily from other planets that get lumped into the Nordic category as well. Groups that are what we are calling inner Earth groups, that are very Nordic looking and could easily be described as a Nordic. A lot of these non-terrestrials looked very human.
What are the different components of this program? Of course, there's a genetic program where they're taking genetic stock from themselves and from different star systems and mixing them with ours in a way that is going to make us better. It makes us a better vehicle for the higher consciousness they're trying to impart onto us. Now, consciousness is another component. They are trying to give us, different belief systems. They've brought us many different belief systems over the eons. And these belief systems were not always to control us, but they were also to cause us to slowly expand our consciousness and have a more spiritual understanding of things. Now, the spiritual component and the consciousness component are obviously related. The one that has not been talked about that much is the cosmic component, this giant clockwork that's occurring. As we're passing through this giant clock, while we're making this journey, these 22 genetic farmer races are busy working on our genetics and our consciousness and spirituality to make us ready. If they did not do this work, as we went through these cycles, we would go through them much slower because we would not, they're giving us a major boost in genetics, and they're working in concert with the cosmic component.
And this one looked very human. The male and the female did not have hair. They had blue skin, blue eyes, and they were very tall, probably 9 feet tall, if not more. They mostly were sitting down when I saw them. They were very broad. They wore like tunics, white tunic type of clothing, and they had gold belts, very thin belts around them. And I never saw them get up and speak at these conferences, but they were present. My eyes seemed to just find their way to them quite often. There were a few beings like that. These are the reasons these people are sticking out in my head so much, is that I was sitting there and we were told to look at the smart glass pad and try to distract ourselves with the information there. But every once in a while you would look up and you would catch eyes with one of these beings, or you would just see them and they would be so striking looking that you would just catch yourself staring at them. And they did seem to have a very regal or very kingly kind of air to them, and they seemed to be very peaceful, but they were very confident, very, very confident, and seemed to be observing quite a bit. This should be a familiar image. This is an image of what people describe as an eben, and a lot of people have described being abducted by this group and have interacted with the ebens. Now, there was one group in particular that seemed to walk around as much as the Nordics and interface with the other groups. And they also seemed to have a little bit of power, because these other groups would come to them and petition them to assist them in whatever grievances they had with other groups. I think they are some sort of a watcher group that are observing and making sure that this experiment goes to plan and isn't taken in any one direction.
22 genetics experiments are experiments in ascension, the different aspects of ascension. From a cosmic perspective, our local star cluster has been hosting these 22 genetic programs. Outside of our star cluster, there are other programs going on, but these genetic farmer beings did not have access to our local star cluster for quite a while, until there was a war that dropped the defenses that were around our star cluster. There was the ancient builder race, a race that has disappeared, developed a defense grid around our local star cluster. And once that was brought down, all of the genetic farmer races rushed in, because there were genetics that had been developing for eons that they had not had access to. The only genetic experiments that were going on within the local star cluster were beings inside that local star cluster that were beginning to experiment with genetic engineering, and making changes to planets to make them inhabitable, terraforming. So what happens when ET participants of the experiment incarnate on Earth? Well, these beings, they have to work within cosmic law. In order for some of them to be able to come here and do experiments on us, they will take a part of their non-terrestrial group and have them incarnate as human beings. And in doing so, giving permission for them to be abducted or experimented on, or any number of other things. But because of cosmic law, they have to have their memories wiped when they come in. It's just a part of the cosmic law.
Now, in this image, this is the green-skinned people that I've discussed before. Their skin looked the same color of an olive, a green olive that you pulled out of a jar. No difference. There was a man and two females present each time. They are probably, the man was probably about 6.5, 7 feet tall, and the women were about 6 feet tall, very muscular. The men had very short hair, very military looking, like a flat top. The women had extremely long, shiny black hair, very shiny black hair that went down to the middle of their backs. And the women would sit with the male, and they would be very quiet during the actual meeting, but afterwards they seemed like more like social butterflies. They seemed to split up and then go to each group, and they were obviously socializing. And interestingly enough, my last trip, I had an encounter with one of the females, and it was the only time I had an encounter at one of these meetings with a non-terrestrial. I was there, Gonzalez was there, and we had some intuitive empaths that were secret space program military guys. And they were sitting there kind of making jokes a little bit about her looking like Captain Kirk's girlfriend. And at one point, one of these females walked up to me, and she had empathically or telepathically figured out what we were talking about. I guess she was so much in our consciousness, we became a part of her consciousness. And she came over and she asked us if Captain Kirk was someone that we served under. And it was pretty shocking. She came over and spoke in English to us, you know, and was asking if we served under Captain Kirk. So it was a little bit of an embarrassment to me and those others.
We've had ETs die on Earth, and depending on where they are in their development, if they're a fourth or a fifth density being, especially a fourth, they can get caught up in our incarnation cycle. As a matter of fact, in the intruder intercepted interrogation program, our perspective was that there was this ET group that was coming in, abducting people at night, and then returning them dead. And you know, how evil is that, right? That's horrible. They're killing people. Let's figure out what's going on. Let's intercept one of these vessels and interrogate them. Well, we did. And guess what we found out? They were there on a rescue mission from their perspective. Thousands of years earlier, one of their craft had crashed, and many of their inhabitants had gotten caught up in our incarnation cycle. And what they perceived they were doing is locating long-lost comrades and rescuing them from this horrible third density life and putting them back into a body that they had been in before. So from our perspective, it looked like a very evil, heinous thing that they were doing, but from their perspective, they were rescuing long-lost comrades. What is the natural law loophole? Well, as I stated, they incarnate here to prevent violating any type of cosmic law. Now, not all wanderers or starseeds are coming here to be guinea pigs. Most of us have a soul contract, and I think I was talking with Teresa recently. When I check out of this existence, I'm going to want to see the paperwork. I want to see a signature, because I don't know why I would have agreed to this. This is crazy. But supposedly, we agreed to this. I don't know. It could be a psyop, but supposedly we agreed to it.
Now, this image here depicts another of the very human-looking beings, a very Asian-looking being. Their skin was more of a slightly more orangish tint, and they had these blue kind of cat eyes that the irises took up almost the entire eyeball that you could see. I saw them interacting quite a bit with the other human-looking groups. They seemed pretty standoffish from the insectoid type groups, so there seems to be some sort of a rift between those two groups, most likely a dispute in these genetic programs. Now, she does have feline-looking eyes, but she is not to be confused with the actual feline race that I only observed one time. It was on the research vessel, and they were moving its body. It had been, there was a capture or kill order out on these beings. And what occurred was these beings teleport around, and they were able to catch one of them, and it died. They weren't able to keep it alive. And it was a very kind of a lavender-looking, cat-looking being. And the head, the ears, and the face looked very cat-like. The body was more of a humanoid torso.
So how do they contain the experiment? If they have all these different experiments and all these different experiments, mice, lab mice, roaming the earth, how do they keep these gene pools pure? How do you keep them from interbreeding together unless you want them to? Well, within religions and social norms, you have them program themselves. You create beautiful things like racism. You instill hate and fear of what is different than you so that you will either attack it or flee from it. They have different languages to keep you separated from each other conscious-wise, as well as they'll separate you from different geological locations. And what they want to do, what they've mainly done is they programmed us to, I mean, how many of you were younger, you had a parent say, you know, you can't marry outside of your race. You know, those are that is us maintaining ourselves. We were programmed to maintain ourselves. And we're starting to break a lot of those programs as a society, slowly but surely.
So this image here is depicting one of the mantids, or a mantis race. They are very heavily involved in the genetic side of these 22 different programs, and they participate in several different programs. People will often witness seeing mantids with grays, or with Nordics, and even with reptilians. So these groups work across multiple different genetic programs, and they are known as the genetic masters in our local cluster. Now, you may remember a lot of these stories that are told from abductees, and you'll notice that they have very terrifying encounters with these beings. The weird thing is you don't pick up emotions the way you normally would from another humanoid type of being. Their communications with each other are through some sort of neural network that is like telepathy or a shared consciousness. And for them to connect with us and communicate with us, it takes an effort from them. They are totally divorced from us when it comes to emotion. So we could kind of call them amoral. But when they are interacting with us, they are not thinking, oh, this poor human, that just does not enter their consciousness. They are there working on a project, and we are the subjects of that project.
Now, these programs are working in concert with each other for the overall goal, but they're also competing with each other. They want to see their genetic line, they want to see their program be the one that comes out on top. Now, a lot of them, it's not an ego thing for them, because they are tied to us karmically. Until they are invested in this program, they have to help us develop physically through genetics, and consciousness, help our consciousness expand, so that when this cosmic component occurs, we are ready to ascend or expand in our consciousness, which will allow them to take the next step. But because they have karmic entanglement with us, they can no longer ascend. They are tied to us in our process. So how does this program develop over time? Well, at first, of course, they're going to be tinkering with our genetics in the background, sending angels down to walk amongst us and give us different ideas about religion or different tools for civilization. But when we get to the point where we're starting to get now, to where we are maintaining, we're beginning to maintain genetics ourselves. We're breaking the genetic codes. Before long, we are going to self-manage. Every civilization out there reaches that point to where they don't have to be tinkered with anymore. They become, I guess, mature, and they begin to tend their own gardens. And that's where we're about to be. The Anshar and the different groups, they can manipulate their DNA, their energetic fields, and that's something that we are all headed towards, as well as becoming a cosmic species, which overtly becoming a cosmic species. Right now, we have a presence in the cosmos that is not exactly a positive one, but that too will change.
The tall grays are depicted in this image, and they're called tall grays for the obvious reason. They're, about 8 feet tall. They look very similar to the classic grays that are described by people, but usually you see the 3 to 4 foot tall gray beings next to these tall grays. What these small grays are usually some type of biological robot, programmed life form. You will see these small grays with the Nordics, you'll see them with the reptilians, you'll see them with any number of groups. It's like standard hardware or something out there that everyone uses. It's like everyone's on a Mac or a PC, everyone's using this type of technology. Now, the tall grays are very much involved in the genetic part of these 22 different programs. They are in competition with the insectoid groups. And they are in competition with the humanoid groups as well, but they work closely with them in different aspects of these different programs. So they are given more of a free rein to come down here and work amongst humans on these genetic programs, doing the actual hands-on. A lot of these beings they'll be the ones that come down and physically touch the humans and take the specimens and do the work, and they report back to this larger body. Some people may also remember abductee experiences where they will describe seeing a tall gray and then seeing a man in uniform, in a U.S. military uniform. That is because there is a very strong bond and agreement between the tall grays and the U.S. government, shadow government, that involves trading of biological specimens from off-planet and technologies in trade for allowing them to come down and do their experiments without being interfered with. And a lot of times human military will be on these abduction ships as observers, taking notes of the names of everybody, the time, what was done, and they keep a log of that, because in the beginning, these beings were supposed to be giving us the information about who they were abducting, and then we found out they were not being honest with us. So because we now have the ability through our advanced space programs to deflect ships trying to come into our atmosphere, they now have to work with us and allow observers, human observers on their ships.
How many people here went to Eclipse of Disclosure? A few? Yeah, it was an awesome event. A very family-oriented event. We're going to have another one. It's going to be in Colorado this time, Loveland, Dimensions of Disclosure. As you can see, we're having some big speakers, and there's going to be camping and a major family environment. That's what we try to encourage in our little our festivals. Now, I've been talking about this for a year. I'm happy to announce that Return of the Guardians is now on sale. Finally. Thank you.